Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the second workshop of Water in Communications program for 2023. Happy to see some of your faces from yesterday and some new people that have joined us. Welcome very much. My name is Jörgel Espeland, and I will be your host. Our producer is Cecile Pilon-Hugh, and she's taking care of all technical issues. So if you have any problems with sound or connections, you can send her a direct message in the chat and we'll try and sort it out. Water in Communications, formerly known as the World Water Week Communications Initiative for those who were on the program 2021 and 2022, has been developed in cooperation with the Grundfos Foundation. And this year we will focus on the theme of World Water Week, Seeds of Change, Innovative Solutions for a Water-Wise World. And just as a reminder to all of you here today, if you can't make it for one of the sessions during our series, don't worry, we'll record all the workshops and we will send them on a YouTube link by the end of the week, so you won't miss anything. Any questions you have regarding the series today or future, just pop me an email at gorel.espeland@seawood.org. It's the same email that's you've been used before. And before we start, I'd just like to remind you to keep your microphones muted and put all the questions that you like to ask our speakers in the chat box, and I will convey them to the speakers after their presentations. It's just a practical reason we can't have people shouting out questions in the middle of a presentation. So we just keep it to the chat. And let me now introduce you to the first speaker, Will de Freitas, Energy and Environmental Editor at The Conversation. Some of you might already be familiar with the publication, and Will is going to tell us more about this international news platform that is changing the way academics interacts with media. Welcome, Will, and over to you.
Hello. Thanks so much, everyone. Really great to be here. Really great to see such a mix of places people are from in the chat. I've done these sorts of talks before about the conversation, done quite regularly mostly to British-based academics, and it's never as exciting as knowing that people in Venezuela, India, South Africa, Indonesia and Kenya are all here, so that's great. Thank you so much. I'm just going to talk a little bit about what the conversation is very briefly, and then explain some of the sort of challenges involved in communicating some of the academic ideas around water and sort of related kind of climate and society and so on issues. And then yeah, I'm very happy to take any of your questions at the end. So just bear with me. I'm going to share my screen. So this is theconversation.com as of today. If you log on and you are somewhere else in the world, it may look slightly differently, as we have different versions. If you're in Spain, for instance, it'll look something like this. We are a news, commentary and analysis website written entirely by academic experts, and every piece is a collaboration between an academic expert and a journalist such as myself. We have a slightly unusual story as our lead, as it happens right now, on the evolutionary origins of masturbation. But that's just the way these things happen. But as you can see, lots of different stories. I'll just click through, let's just click onto this one, which I haven't seen yet. It was only published last night. They're generally quite short. Our story's about 600 to 800 words long. We have lots of links to further research that you can sort of see there. So they're a jumping off point to explore an issue in further detail. And we're aiming to not just be academics talking to each other, it's to reach as wide an audience as possible. So just that's a super quick overview of what an article looks like. I do encourage you to kind of take a look at the website in your own time, theconversation.com. So what are we? We're the largest publisher of original research-based content. We're a non-profit. We're funded by universities. That every model is slightly different. So it says there are eight editions operating in 12 countries worldwide. This is our plan for global domination, is coming along extremely well. So there are equivalents of myself in Australia, in America, in Kenya, in South Africa, Indonesia, Spain, France, some other places. Each of these has slightly different models. There's a bit more foundation money in some places. So others are exclusively funded by universities. We're basically funded by the university and research sector as a non-profit in order to get as much academic ideas and thinking out to the wider audience as possible. We also we do media training for academics, a bit similar to this, a bit sort of longer. I tend to do I do sort of 2-hour workshops with academics on how to write for the general public, and we give everyone readership metrics and so on to understand who's reading their articles and where in the world they're based and so on. So what we do, expert pieces written swiftly. They don't have to be written swiftly, but if you're talking about a big breaking news event, for instance, if you are an expert in well, actually a very topical one, the dam in Ukraine, if you're someone who knows about the impact of flooding, or like the use of water in warfare or something, we kind of want you to write about that more or less, ideally today. Yesterday would have been even better, certainly this week, because in a month's time people might have moved on, and it's kind of no use saying, oh, I've actually got an academic article coming out on this in 2024. That doesn't really work with sort of people's attention spans and the media news cycle and stuff. So we tend to ask you to write, sort of turn things around fairly quickly. A scrappy first draft is fine, because it's our job to then edit things into shape. We also do the occasional long reads and stuff, but most of what we do is 800 words. That's about the length of a newspaper column. Takes about 2 minutes to read. We do sort of make the editing process as easy as possible for so working collaboratively between academics and journalists. It's something we kind of really pride ourselves on, and there's a lot of back and forth in certain stories, but we cannot publish until an author has approved. So everything you see on the site has been approved by an academic expert who, the author of the story, and they have to be writing about what they actually know about. It's not a platform for academics to write about absolutely anything they fancy. It has to be, if you're an expert in melting icebergs in Antarctica, that's what you write about. It's not a platform for you to then talk about whatever you fancy. But yeah, absolutely everything is approved. So I've heard so many horror stories over the years from academics who've spoken to people who are then to a journalist, and then found that their headline was completely changed, or their article was cut in half, or whatever. We sort of want to completely avoid that. I think we do completely avoid that. And because we're funded by universities, we can basically give away our content for free. Everything on the site is published under Creative Commons license. It's the same license used by Wikipedia, for instance, and it means that other websites can republish our stuff as well. So in that sense, we're a sort of resource for additional stories for the rest of the media. How do we go about coming up with stories? Either around about half the stories I run are me approaching an academic, where I'll say, look, something's like such and such has happened in the world, or I see you published a new paper or something. Could you write about this for us? The other half will be people pitching their ideas to me. We then agree a brief. I say, can you write about this? Please focus on X, Y, and Z. Please avoid this. And I commission them to write up. They write something. That's our editing platform. You can see there. We get to the point where we approve and publish. That can lead to further republications elsewhere in the media. And then that's a screenshot of our dashboard, which each academic gets, showing who's read your articles and where in the world they are, and so on. So we are, I think, quite a big platform. This is the UK edition alone. Now, when I say Conversation UK, it could be kind of renamed Conversation Northern Europe or something, as the sort of UK edition is kind of responsible now for Ireland, some universities in Scandinavia as well, some in the Netherlands also. So we're sort of, it's really a bit beyond the UK, but the UK edition, those big numbers, it's quite hard to sort of break that down. And every article is read more than 1,000 times, most well into the thousands, around about between half and a third of articles on the environment desk will be read 10,000 or more times. So I think it's quite a substantial platform, and you can sort of see the sort of footprint of a story and sort of people discussing it elsewhere. Most readers are outside the UK and Ireland, so we do have quite a global focus. So there will be, so some stories, if we go back to the homepage on the UK version, yes, obviously the evolutionary origins of masturbation, that will have a global readership. But there was another one up there that was talking about Keir Starmer, who's the opposition leader in British politics at the moment, and talking about his plans for oil and gas. That will have a predominantly UK focus, but most reads are quite global. And from an editorial point of view, I'm always trying to make sure we think quite globally. So that's just a very brief intro to the conversation. I want to talk about some of the challenges we face specifically on water and climate issues. I've put climate in there because it's sort of obviously very, very related. You need a news hook. So this is some journalistic jargon where if you imagine you're fishing and then you're hooking the fish on. And that's what we talk about in journalism. You're trying to hook the readers in by something that's happening in the world. Unfortunately, kind of water issues and climate type issues, yes, there are some newsy things. So floods, hurricanes, those are big issues that have big breaking news and will be kind of front page and everything. Most other things are not so newsy. So that can be a bit of a challenge. Sometimes, it says there, a great news hook does come along and makes people pay attention. For me, the absolute classic example of this was a show on the BBC about 5 years ago called Blue Planet 2. I think a lot of people around the world ended up watching it. This is a David Attenborough narrated, certainly in the UK, it was narrated by David Attenborough, program just about the oceans. And there were a few clips in that of animals, sea animals who'd been caught in plastic or had eaten plastic or were being otherwise had sort of issues with plastic pollution. Now, in the first few years, I've done this job for about 10 years now. The first few years, no one read about plastic pollution. Academics would pitch me stories and would say, oh, look, this is really important. I want to write about plastic. I want to write about microplastics or something like that. And sometimes I'd say yes, we'd run a story and I think, oh, this is great. And no one would read it. After Blue Planet 2 came out, people were interested. And it filtered through not just to ocean pollution, but it meant there was an entire breakthrough, certainly in the UK I'm talking, but I think, maybe this is similar issues may have happened with other things in other countries, but suddenly people were interested in plastic pollution. There was a big sort of sea change, and that was because there was a news hook. There was a TV show that people had already seen that you can then use as a way to then communicate kind of broader scientific issues. Another problem, you're telling the same story again and again. How many times have we seen a headline saying IPCC scientists issue final warning? I recently ran a story where we actually had, we compared and contrasted the opening paragraphs of a BBC News coverage of an IPCC report in about 2007 and an IPCC report in 2021 or 2022. And the opening paragraphs are strikingly similar. Okay, the numbers involved are slightly different. There's been a bit more warming, but you're trying to communicate very often the same sort of thing again and again. So you need to find kind of new angles or new ways to say this. I've just got some other ones there, polar ice melting, temperature records broken, things we've sort of heard before, but it's still important to tell people. We still need to get that out there. Then, I don't know why that's done a double one, but yeah, too gloomy or too optimistic. it can be quite hard to strike the balance. You don't want to just relentlessly pound people with negative stuff, but equally, if you say, oh, we can just, just do, here's these simple solutions, that isn't particularly helpful either. And then you have to think about how to relate some of this stuff to the reader. I've got some big abstract things there: billions of liters of water, a global temperature rise of 1.1 degree, a drought on the other side of the world. These things can be quite hard to relate to an individual reader. And so you have to sometimes come up with something a bit more relatable. How can you save your water before you then go on to, well, on a global scale, this is why we need to save water. But so there can be, sometimes it's better to zoom in and tell sort of more relatable stories as a way into the sort of wider, kind of talking about wider macro scale challenges. So I'll go through a few examples of how kind of things we might be looking for in a story. So there are stories that are related to news. In the UK at the moment, I'm embarrassed to report we're having a sort of sewage crisis. I don't know if any of you are aware of this. I don't know if it's a kind of international story at all, but Britain's rivers are almost all completely massively polluted. And this has happened really in the last 10 years. There's a massive change. And most of our beaches now have raw sewage dumped on them. It's been a big talking point. So you can do some commentary on a topical issue like this one, where we go to a water industry expert to explain what's going on. Then you have your big kind of headline news stuff, news with a capital N. This was a report on the Glasgow Climate Pact written by 2 climate scientists who are basically in the room at the time, one of them was involved in negotiations as well. Then we have the explainer type stories. Now, a good example of when people should be doing an explainer type story is what are the questions that people might have who aren't fellow experts when you say that, oh, I'm an expert in sea level rise. The sort of question that the layperson might ask you is, how do you actually measure how high the sea is? Like, when you think about it, maybe it's hard. You can't just put a tape measure there. It's maybe harder than you think. So these types of things are trying to explain often like quite simple concepts, something like the circular economy, very relevant to a lot of kind of water saving type research as well. Lots of people on this call, I'm sure, can like have a stab at what this kind of concept is, but when you can go to an expert, it can really sort of be a sort of useful contribution to public knowledge. There we go. Sorry, I don't know why this is going jerky. Okay, then we have stories based on new research. Now, this can either be new research by someone else. So this is a story on the left that I published yesterday by a climate scientist who wasn't involved in the paper, but is adding his expertise. He's a polar scientist. Then the one on the right is someone writing about their own new research. We cover both of those. And then you can do slightly more topical ways to introduce research. So again, going back to the British water crisis, I think that photo's in Oslo, but so hopefully the Norwegians have some answers for us. And then you had the kind of how-to expert advice type things, where perhaps this isn't ways to use water at home isn't the kind of cutting edge of academic science, but it can be incredibly useful nonetheless to hear from someone who is an expert in their sort of academic field of water use, and have them provide some advice. All of you as kind of experts will have knowledge that you can kind of usefully impart to people. Then you have the more sort of timeless stories, where you, for instance, tell an interesting story, or you answer an interesting question. The key thing about an interesting question is it has to be a question that someone might ask without already knowing the answer. So that would, that's the sort of question that a complete layperson might ask, if we stopped emitting greenhouse gases right now, would we stop climate change? Good question. It's one that's quite obvious to most climate scientists. Spoiler, the answer is no, but is a kind of useful question, I think, to kind of with which you can then frame and kind of draw people in to then read about more of the sort of general science that you're trying to get across to people. Things that are a bit surprising or counterintuitive or something, or a bit unusual. Can humans survive on a completely or almost completely water-free planet? Or no, I don't think the whole planet was water-free, but largely very, very desert-like planet. Or why vegans should avoid avocados and almonds. Kind of a surprising, unusual research-based takes. Then you have the things that are perhaps more personal or human interest-based. We have a guy who is an Arctic scientist writing about what it's like doing research around polar bears. Or people who've interviewed someone. If you've met anyone interesting in your research or something, that can be a very useful way to discuss your kind of research ideas. They're sort of telling people stories. It adds a bit of narrative and a bit of kind of a human interest. Then we have the odd listicle. We're not above doing a sort of bit of the old BuzzFeed style stories, where you have things like this: 5 climate science misconceptions, or 5 ways to keep your home warm in winter. They can be just very useful, and people do like to click on them and sort of read things in the listicle format. Just in the last couple minutes, I'm just going to talk very quickly about journalistic approach and some of the things we're sort of looking for. Most academics, in my experience, I've worked with academics in basically every discipline over the past 10 years, are not very good at recognizing when their language is quite dense and academic. And if you want to test that, I always just say, go and pick a completely random different department in your own university and read through some of the abstracts of their research. And it won't mean very much to you. And then just think, that's how a lot of other people respond when they're reading your work. But you tend to, if you only communicate with fellow experts where you have a sort of shared language, and I don't blame people. This is how academia works. So what we try to do at Conversation, try to express ideas as clearly as possible. We really sort of believe, I personally believe, and sort of institutionally, the Conversation believes that kind of any idea can be expressed in simple language, and if it can't, it's too complicated or unnecessarily complicated for an 800-word article. So there are some times where we just say, look, we don't need to get into that level of detail. Let's just say, we then did some complicated equations, and then that's how we figured this out, and then you just move on. That's fine for an 800-word article aimed at ordinary people. Now, if you're ever thinking about how to communicate ideas, sort of complex research ideas, super crucial, come up with a good top line. A top line is a 1-sentence summary of your article. So if you were saying, right, I'm going to write a blog about my new findings on water resource management, or droughts, or somewhere, whatever. Can someone come up to you and say, oh, I hear you're writing an article, what's it about? Can you draw breath once and go, it's about this, and then just say in 1 sentence, this is what your article's about? If you can, you've probably got a good article. If not, if you start going, well, I've got this research and I've got some data and I would like to write something kind of drawing together some of these ideas, and I'm going to make the case that something that really doesn't work journalistically. Like you can absolutely publish that blog and everything, but you're probably going to be limiting your audience to people who are already quite interested in the topic. Journalistically, it's really crucial, and this is the main thing I impress on academics when I do these sort of training things for them, is that it's really important to come up with the top line. Super crucial, and don't try and kind of compress everything in. Much better just hammering home one point, and getting that across. So yeah, that's I think we're at the end. These are our people. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very, very much, Will. I think that was very interesting and some really valid points. Good for us in the audience to hear, especially like the one about the one line. If we can fit it into a sentence, then it's worth reading. We do have some questions in the chat here. I start with also one that I was thinking about. Actually, Afia says, if your content has Creative Commons license, can they also be translated to other languages and published?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So we get approached quite often by people wanting to just translate, and we sort of have to kind of, if it's not a language that anyone in our office has any expertise in or something, we have to sort of kind of trust that their take their translation on trust. You can kind of check these things a bit with Google Translate and the sort of various tools now, but yeah, it's not, it's a full-on something we encourage. I love it when an article pops up in a different...
And what are your guidelines for republishing if you are a publication?
So we have they're on the site.
Right.
It's sort of right at the bottom. There's a republish guidelines thing. It basically is that you can republish anything you want for free as long as you keep the original text and don't modify it. As you cite the original author and their institution, and you also cite and link back to the conversation as the original publisher.
Right, thank you. Jenna asks, on average, how much time is spent rewriting of the academic writer's original work after it is submitted?
It really depends. So just this morning, someone has written a piece for me that I thought was really well written, and I've had to do very little, and I'm probably, in terms of actual writing changes, it's mostly little tweaks for kind of our house style and stuff, sort of how we format things and stuff. And I've spent probably less than half an hour on it, and I'll spend probably another half hour looking for photos and that sort of thing. There are some stories where I might spend several hours kind of going through the text where it's kind of much more dense, the ideas are harder to read, but most articles will be somewhere in between. I want to stress that yes, there are stories where virtually every sentence has been edited in some way, but that's still all fully signed off by the academic author. So we might have quite a bit of back and forth, but I think in 10 years and hundreds, maybe thousands of articles, yeah, probably, don't know, quite a lot. There are maybe fewer than 10, I'd say, articles where I've just not been able to reach agreement with the academic on that.
Right. And Pooja would like to know if you could talk about any of the unique pitches around water climate that's actually pulled your attention instantly, and how was that written differently in that case?
That's a great question. A pitch that really grabbed me. Let me think. I like, there was one. I mean, one of the key things that I think is always really, really important that academics often don't do is illustrating things with examples. I think, I can't remember if it was in the slides there in the end. There was one on water being used in warfare, and someone pitched a story on that just before the recent UN water conference. And I think one of the reasons I said yes to the pitch was he had lots of good examples, and examples I think are really, very often academics and researchers and stuff, when they're quite used to talking to people who have a shared knowledge and understanding of what you're sort of referring to. So and whereas it's often the examples when you're communicating to a wider public who don't share that kind of knowledge and kind of awareness of the literature on the topic, it's often the examples that really draw people in. So I think what I liked with that pitch was it listed a few examples of and it just sent me down a bit of a Wikipedia rabbit hole of like looking up all these kind of cases and stuff. And if you can trigger a bit of interest in me, I'm thinking, God, like just from this pitch, I've already got 5 new tabs open, and I'm reading about some time in 1950 something when a dam was deliberately burst by rockets firing at it or something. And I'm thinking, God, I'm actually really interested in this topic. Had he just pitched it as, I'd like to write about warfare, and here are the sort of abstract intellectual points I'd like to make, it wouldn't have been nearly as successful.
All right, good, thank you. But you also would like to know, how big is your team around the globe?
I guess around about 150 journalists, but I couldn't tell you exactly. In the UK, we have about 23-ish, I think. And I think America and Australia are similarly sized. So Australia might even be bigger. This conversation was originally founded in Australia in 2011. The UK was second, and then others have followed there. So yeah, it's certainly more than 100 people. In terms of just on environment issues, I guess probably there's 3 in the UK, and I would say around about 15 maybe. But and then of course, you know, a lot of water stuff overlaps with you know, politics, science, and so on.
Right. And Romani says, I was wondering how other news establishments and online portals could work together with the conversation.
So you could republish our articles. So if you ever see anything that's interesting and you think that could work, we could take this. We absolutely encourage you to take that. Look at the republishing guidelines. Every article on the site also has, in the right-hand column, there's a very simple republish this article button, which you can just click that, and that gives you the sort of formatted text. So you can just more or less copy paste that into your own content system. The other thing is the conversation works as we kind of have emerged, or sort of become a bit of a database for academic experts around the world. So kind of crucially, it's when you see a conversation article, you get a sense of not just that someone's an expert in a topic, but what their angle might be, you know, what they have to say about it. So if there is a huge flood in Britain, and you're thinking, all right, I'd like to find, you know, I'd like to cover this for international media, but I don't know. It can be quite hard to then go into like the Journal of Flood Management Studies or something and read through abstracts and try and work out what this person thinks. If you go on the conversation and search flooding UK, you'll see all sorts of articles that we published, and you'll see not just that, but you'll see, okay, this is the person who's focused on you know, disaster management. This is the person who thinks we need to plant more trees instead of fields. This is the person who thinks you know, all these different angles. So that's a really useful way that we can, I think, help the sort of wider media. If you do find someone via a conversation article, do let them know, because it's just useful for us, and it helps us in our, you can let them know, and you could let one of us know, because it's useful for us. You know, we're a non-profit, but we still need to kind of keep our funders happy. And if a university hears that one of their academics was featured further in the media as a result of a conversation article, that's a good look for us too. That's
great, thank you. We still have some minutes for some more questions. Afia says, how do journalists contribute to your platform?
Journalists they kind of can't really, like, out beyond obviously, you know, we employ lots of journalists, but everyone who writes the conversation, I'm afraid, has to be an academic affiliated to a university. Kind of, it's a bit more clear cut in the UK. I appreciate in a lot of the rest of the world, things, you know, you have more kind of grey area institutions and stuff. We have various policies in place for what does count as a university and what's a think tank. Wouldn't write for us. But yeah, it's really, and that's, it's, you know, sort of with relevance to this, that there are some people who I would quite like to write for us, but kind of can't sort of fall outside of our thing. But it does sort of stop things like sort of climate change deniers often have kind of very credible sounding think tanks, for instance, yet they almost don't really, they barely exist within academia, certainly not in actual climate science departments. You can find climate change deniers in other academic departments. Yeah, that's probably not the answer you wanted, but I'm afraid that
but it's an answer. Right, one quick more question, and then we will have to let you go. That's lots of praise and acclaim for your presentation. Well, I just would like to point that out. A lot of people are very happy about the crystal clear presentation, etc. Marissa said, do you know of any similar platform in Spanish, thinking in LAC audience, etc.?
Well, yes, I do.
You do?
Conversation Spain, which is, I think, the conversation.com/es, but it might also be the conversation.es, although it might be Los Conversation or Las Conversation, I don't know. But certainly if you end up on an English language version of the conversation, at the top of the site, there's a scroll down menu where you can then look up other, I think it may, I don't know if it's happened yet, but I think they are looking to recruit editors, or at some point will move into a sort of general sort of Spanish speaking Latin America as well. But I think for now everyone is based in, certainly the office is in Madrid. I think they may be around Spain,
right. Thank you. There are some Cecile, our technical IT person, and she has already found the conversation.com/es. So that's it. There you got the link as well. There are some more questions in the chat, and there are also some direct questions about some publications for you, Will. But I will copy the questions. I'll send it to you in an email, and then I'll send the answers to all of the participants, because we do need to move on to keep our schedule. Thanks again so much for joining us.
Thank you everyone for that, and for all those great questions. And if you're an academic and are interested in contributing, do go to the site, and it's very annoying. It's really far down on the right hand side, but there's a pitch an article thing. Do get in touch and pitch something. And yeah, thank you so much.
All right, thanks a lot. Thank you. And we have our next speaker here, Natasha Wiseman. I can't hear you. Can you unmute yourself, please?
Yes, so sorry.
Yes.
Hi, Jarell. Lovely to be here. Thanks ever so much for inviting me to the workshop today.
Thank you. Natasha, before we start, I just want to introduce you very quickly as a founder and chief executive for Make Water Famous. And you are joining us from a camper van in the Pyrenees, correct?
That's correct. I
Yes.
am. I'm a digital nomad for the month of June, trying to push technology to its outer limits, and I'm having to go to the top of the mountain to get 5G. So here I am. Hopefully we'll stay in contact with you all.
Thank you so much for that effort. And Make Water Famous, that's another platform with news.
That's correct. That's correct.
Yeah, I'll leave it to you to tell us more about it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I want to start today by telling you about one of my clumsiest attempts to write about water infrastructure. My name's Natasha Wiseman. I'm the founder and chief executive of a positive news platform called Make Water Famous. So maybe Will and I can have a chat later about whether you can only write positive things about water. But I'm also the chief executive of Wise on Water, which is a PR agency and strategic market agency for the water sector in terms of industry. And previously I edited trade media, including World Water Magazine, WWT and WWT Online. So I've written words about water for a long time, and water was something I'd cared about from the earliest age. My father was also a water journalist, and he'd started the first global trade water magazine, World on Water, in the 1970s. I learned that water is about the most important thing in the world, and that's very difficult knowledge to unlearn. After 2 years of studying social anthropology at Edinburgh University, I was frustrated, and that none of the learning was about the real world challenges people faced, and especially what it was like to live without water piped to a household tap, which was a luxury I enjoyed living in the UK. So I took a year out from university and fundraised and volunteered with a charity to deliver 2 micro water projects in rural Tanzania. At last, I got to experience the most challenging water scarcity up close. At one site, we had to dig our own meagre supply from a dry riverbed shared with villagers doing their own washing, goats being watered, and the baboons that came down from the hills behind the camp. At another site, we were putting in a tank and guttering the most rudimentary infrastructure to harvest rainwater for use in a hospital. My job was to remove a soakaway behind the maternity ward. As I struck it with a pickaxe, rats and snakes went scattering, to the most basic of circumstances. My dad passed away 3 years ago, and among his things, I found a letter from 21-year-old me. In it, I try to describe the infrastructure we're building. I sense that I'm trying to impress him by being able to write about water, but I'm really struggling to get the words right. I even draw a picture, and my drawing is terrible to this day. I'd read all the books about the basic water and sanitation systems we had at camp and on site. I had good qualifications in English. I was studying at a top university, but still I found it hard to write about the very simple water systems we were installing. 20 years later, I recognise that this is something I've mastered to some degree. I've built those skills and I've helped others build them. Much of that knowledge comes simply from listening to others more knowledgeable than me and crafting what they say as a clear, concise copy. I recognise that water is very complex and difficult, which is one of the reasons that it's endlessly challenging and fascinating to write about. With Make Water Famous, I've set myself a new challenge, and for my team also. As far as I know, it's the first news platform in the world dedicated to telling positive stories about water to the public at large. And we're not only talking infrastructure and technology now, we're talking water in the broadest possible sense. We want to meet people where they're already close to water, whether that's swimming, fishing, doing the washing, drinking beer, or using blockchain even. And by telling stories in their space, we can bring new people into ours, revealing the value of water for everybody and building this community. After all, water is already in just about every story. We're just making it visible or famous. Perhaps unusually for a workshop, I welcome you taking out your phones and checking out makewaterfamous.com now if you wish, or find us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter. When you find the website, I think you'll see that we're keen to give our Make Water Famous community the experience of being in a watery environment. It's calming and relaxing. The news just flows without annoying pop-ups and adverts getting in the way of the information. It's vital to us that people have easy access to this information. And as I said, all the stories have a positive angle. If you're new to water, you may be thinking, how is that even possible? I read terrible stories about pollution and drought and flooding and scarcity every day. Where on earth is the good news? And my answer is that you're right. All of those challenges are out there, and sometimes they're reported on. But what about the solutions? Each of those challenges already has a solution. It's just waiting for somebody to hear about it and then find a pathway to implement it. By sharing stories via Make Water Famous, we hope we can show the way to those solutions. People can find out what has worked for one city or community and transfer it across, show it to their civic leaders or utilities as an example of what they'd like to see where they live. Just as I was curious about what it was like to live without water, with Make Water Famous, I hope to awaken and satisfy the curiosity of others who want to understand water in all its wondrousness. These aren't stories that are easy to tell, especially when there's a disconnection between people and their water sources. This is particularly the case in high-income countries where a plentiful supply appears through the tap every day as if by magic, and people think it just falls from the sky. We need to bring this hidden infrastructure to the surface so people can better understand the scale and complexity of what's being achieved here. The scientific and engineering community hold the knowledge, and it's so encouraging that these workshops are taking place and making it possible for STEM professionals to sharpen their skills and understanding around communications, and for journalists and other professional communicators to make connections with this extensive knowledge pool. Telling stories about water requires people working together to blend their expertise. And I'm told that we're a near 50-50 split between professional communicators and journalists and scientists, engineers and policymakers in this workshop. Working in the water sector, I've heard for years the frustrations of water specialists, usually with science and engineering backgrounds, who think that journalists don't tell their stories fully or accurately, or even worse, don't tell them at all. Then as a journalist, I know how resource and time-strapped you are, and how you've only a few hours to become an expert on the latest topic, and by tomorrow you'll be on to the next one. all while sticking to prescribed word counts and the style that suits your audience. Some organisations in water have an internal culture that's so fearful of the risk of negative publicity that they make very little effort to share their successes. This is something that has to be overcome and can be managed with professional advice and training. Perhaps the most valuable thing that could happen today is that some of you can start to make those important to bridge this information gap, to bring more of the solutions to bigger audience. These relationships are built over time and require trust. But as a start, maybe write in the chat about the kind of work you do. If there's an area of expertise you're open to sharing information about, or if you're a journalist, what kind of outlet you work for and the kinds of stories you're looking for. Historically, there's been an assumption by some in the water industry that people don't care or aren't interested in water. People have said this to me even recently, but our experiences with Make Water Famous show that they do care, and they're very interested when you reach them at a place where they're already engaged, answering questions they're already asking, or telling them something surprising that they don't know. In our first year, we reached over 500,000 people in over 100 countries, all organic growth, and our feedback is 99.98% positive too. At the moment, the conversation in the UK at least has, as Will I think explained, is very narrowly focused on specific water issues, but there's a much bigger picture. It's really important that people get to hear about the scale of the water crisis, how it will affect them, the urgency around building resilience and how to transform to a water secure planet. But also, they need to know that there's an extraordinary array of solutions at hand, from the transformation of water treatment, wastewater treatment plants into energy and resource facilities, to the conversion of wastewater and seawater into drinking water, the greening of our cities to mitigate flooding, robots that crawl along pipes to fix leaks, sensors that can carry out water quality analysis at the kitchen tap. And it's really a question for the people in this Zoom. How do we move this conversation forward? Your curiosity and commitment will be critical to that, because you need that combination of communicators along with engineers and scientists and innovators. Everyone has to work together to understand the issues and to relay them effectively. Communications is complex. How do you tell stories in a way that connects with people? Well, of course, the first thing you do is identify who your intended audience is. Is it the general public? If so, which demographics? Is it your peers, other scientists and engineers perhaps, or decision makers and civic leaders? Or is it a mix of all or some of these groups? Then which are the channels and media that will be most effective in spreading your message and reaching your audience? Do you need to engage specialists to help craft this strategy and messaging? This is something often missed in the water sector and elsewhere, that within communications and journalism, there are a range of specific skill sets that can be deployed to help different challenges. So maybe after the workshop, seek out somebody that you wouldn't necessarily talk to and find out if they've got a story worth telling, or if they can help you tell your story, or work out what's bugging you. What do you wish people knew? So to summarize, writing and communication about water issues, infrastructure, systems, technologies isn't easy. And we need to bring together different sets of professional expertise to do it well. We need journalists and communicators and scientific and engineering professionals to come together to find ways to tell stories with purpose, with colour and passion. If we're to communicate effectively with the public, we need to see it as a dialogue or a conversation, inviting their curiosity and finding a place where they're already engaged with water. As Will said about the plastics, we need to unearth the positive, solution-orientated stories to share learning and give hope. So I want to leave you with a challenge. Think of a great story about water that you want to spread and tell someone who doesn't work in water about it. Think how you can make it as interesting and engaging as possible for them. How will you reach them? Is it a friend or family at a barbecue? Is it a social media post on LinkedIn or Facebook, or a letter to the newspaper? Or can you be really bold and reach out and tell your story to a journalist? How would you go about building that trusting relationship? If you're a journalist looking for story ideas, think water, and there will always be something to say and a new angle to take. And of course, at Make Water Famous, we always want to hear your stories. So do drop us a line if there's something you want to share with us. And we welcome journalists from outside media using our content. Just get in touch if there's something you want to repurpose from our site to make sure that there isn't another interest involved. or if there's specialist information you need, we may be able to send you in the right direction to find it. We've only got one mission, and that's to make water famous. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Natasha. We have some people that's commented here in the chat. Thank you for emphasizing the need for combining information with passion for water. And we have a question. There are people around the world who are not aware of the water crisis, especially from underserved communities. Can you share any of your story that helped to educate them? Can you think of any story there?
Well, I hope that most of our stories at the end of the day have that message. As I say, it's a positive news site. We start with the solution, but within the story, you will, by the third paragraph, be getting to hear what the challenge was. We're just bringing people in a way that isn't alarming. and so they're already confident that they're going to that the solution will be in there. But yeah, at the end of the day, the water crisis is in all communities, and if you browse our site, you'll find stories that that tell that story, but just through a slightly different lens, through the lens of the solution. So
the solution is the answer, one could
say.
Well,
of course. I mean, the solutions are there for most of these challenges, and it's just finding the pathway to them. So if we can spread that information, if we can share those stories, if people can learn from those stories and then demand that for their communities or find ways to make that demand, it's helpful, I hope.
Right. Ulrike sent a comment: to reach people, you really have to go back to the famous know your audience, as you so well pointed out, as there is no one-fits-all approach possible. And I think right. You want to comment on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, we think very carefully about that. Even different social media channels have different demographics and different, Instagram is very popular with very image-led. It's got a younger demographic from Facebook, for example. LinkedIn is the more, we find our science and technology stories run best on there, whereas maybe our community stories or sports and well-being stories run better on Facebook. So yeah, we're thinking and reflecting and analyzing our data and analytics all the time to get the stories on the right stories on the right channel, presented in the right language and in the right way. But on the website, you'll find that complete mix, and hopefully everybody can identify what their core interest is.
Right, thank you. Samara says, very interesting angle to look at water. Thank you, Natasha. You just gained a new follower. So more readers.
That's what we want, please. We really urge everyone to get on board, sign up for the newsletter so that you get regular reminders of what our content is, and share our stories if you find them interesting. Please like, share, follow.
Right. Pooja asks, what is the best way to pitch solution-based ideas to you? Is it your website or on social media? How do they reach you?
There's an email address on the website. So send ideas to us. We're not a big team and we're not yet funded, so we are resource strapped. We are seeking partners in the water industry to grow the scope of what we're able to do. So be patient with us for now, but that's happening at quite a pace. So we're working very hard on developing those partnerships. We think that's how we'll drive revenue and ultimately have a dedicated editorial team like The Conversation. I'm very jealous of their hundreds of journalists around the world. That's a vision for me to aspire to, for sure.
Right. Well, we all start somewhere. Will says, do you think there's any particular area that needs new technology or inventions, or do we already have all the tech necessary to solve the water crisis?
Well, I'm probably not the absolutely best person to answer that question, but I do work with a lot of innovative companies in my PR and marketing agency, Wise on Water, and there are solutions for most challenges already, and there are also even better solutions coming through all the time. So a sort of mixed answer to that one, in that yes, the solutions are there if the investment is available and if that is prioritized by governments, by communities, by utilities, but also even more efficient solutions that are even more effective. The whole digital transformation of water is underway, so who knows where what the industry will look like in 10 or 20 years, given that those might be faster ways than replacing pipes to fix leaks. Who knows what we might see in the future. So I think that drive for innovation is exciting, and I've never seen it move quite as fast as it is now in water. But that's not to say that most things couldn't be done with what's already available.
Right, right. I also wanted to ask you about artificial intelligence. That's been a lot of talk about it lately. How shall we regulate it? Shall we not regulate it?
I've been thinking about it.
Do you think it will affect the role of journalism?
I think it's going to have a massive effect on journalism and on writing altogether, because people will be able to generate articles. But I think I'd be interested to hear what Will has to say about this. But because we're creating content and such unique content about such sometimes we're writing about things that have never been written about before, so the thing that's going to be scraped by AI is the thing we wrote in the first place. So I think it could be a time saver for people. If you're not confident with your writing, maybe you can get a head start with that, but I still think there'll be a need to craft this in the way that I describe for specific audiences, to ensure it's high quality, to ensure that it's engaging in the right way and it's accurate and showing the right messaging. So I think I think in such specialist journalism as water, there isn't as big a threat as there is in more routine mainstream journalism, perhaps. I'll be really watching it closely, working out what's happening.
Right, I see, Will, you're still on the program here. Do you want to jump in and have a say about AI?
We've actually just instigated a policy, sort of officially saying no articles written by ChatGPT as a sort of immediate short-term thing. And in the sort of medium and longer term, we might well think about how these sorts of tools can be, because very clearly, you know, when I look at what ChatGPT can do in my job, I don't think it can do my job as well as me, but I think it can do a big chunk of what I'm doing. I think it can do a bunch of what I do to, you know, some percentage of the standard. In the longer term, it's something we're going to revisit. And at some point, someone will sneak an article past us that was written by ChatGPT. I think it's inevitable. And then, and you know, they might all kind of laugh at us and stuff. But I think also in its kind of early days, yes, there are sort of issues with it. But I think, you know, people laughed at Google Maps when they first when it first started, and then now it's as reliable as a map that you buy in the shop. And so it's a really sort of, it throws up a whole bunch of issues that we're sort of currently grappling with, and we haven't really got an answer for yet. But yeah, sorry, that's not the clearest of answers, but it depends.
It's a very nice contribution, because we need to think about this in different ways. So there are no clear answers, I think. So thank you very much for jumping in there.
No problem.
Thanks. Any more questions for Natasha? I also wanted to get back to you. We're talking, Natasha, about how do we move the conversation forward, because we need to move the conversation forward. And what are your best tips of moving the conversation forward?
I think take some of Will's advice on how to identify your own stories. Work out what are the stories in what you're doing. I think it's often a secondary question for people with a scientific background to think of their work in terms of stories. So what stories are there embedded in the work you're doing, and how can you bring them to the surface, and who would be interested in them? So always be looking and try telling them to somebody, a bit like Will said. There's a very wonderful astrophysicist called Janna Levin, and she wrote her first book, How the Universe Got Its Spots, as letters to her mother to try and explain the topography of space. So, you know, can you explain to your mother what you're doing? Start with that one, unless your mother's a scientist too. And then you might start to work out what interests people and what's interesting about what you do to other people.
Right, thank you.
And then get in touch with us and tell us.
Yeah. Yes, and how to get in touch with Make Water Famous is on your website. So
yeah, there's an email address, help@makewaterfamous.com. It's quite easy.
Thank you. Thank you, Natasha, thank you for joining us from the heights of the Pyrenees, and I'm glad it worked out technically. We could hear you. Sometimes the sound was a bit lagging, but you know, we made it to the end. Thank you very much.
Fantastic opportunity. Thank you.
I'd like to just end up with a comment from Lena saying, great presenters, informative insights, news story leads, and thank you, Natasha. You have even more followers now from Malaysia. And we are actually going to go into breakout rooms and follow up a little bit of what you were talking about, Natasha, because I want all of you in the group now to share stories with one another. Meghie Rodrigues, Brazilian freelance science and climate journalist. And you are going to talk a little bit about climate journalism and continue on the theme of the day, almost like the balance between doomism and public engagement. And the floor is yours, Meghie.
Thank you so much, Gaurav. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. So let me put the slideshow to present. You're all seeing that? Can everybody see the whole, yes?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So thank you all very much for being here with us. Welcome, everyone. I'm very happy to talk about climate change coverage and disinformation. So let's have a few words about what we're going to talk today and present myself to you. Let me change here. Yes. So I'm Meghie Rodrigues, a freelance science and environment journalist based in Brazil, and I work mostly for international English language publications. I usually publish at Nature and IEOS, but I've written to many other outlets such as the New York Times, Scientific American, Science News, Manga Bay, as well as other Brazilian news websites such as Folha de São Paulo, UOL, and Pesquisa FAPESP. I cover mostly Earth, environment, and climate sciences, and also a lot of Brazil-focused environmental science policy. I'm also studying climate disinformation in a PhD at the State University of Campinas, which is pretty close to São Paulo City. So, yes, here. So here's an outline of what we're going to cover in the presentation. And we'll talk about challenges in covering climate and climate science and how writing about climate change has evolved over the years, what mis and disinformation are, and what are some ways out that we as journalists can engage with the public and tackle the problem. We also talk about balancing doomism and realism and networks of climate journalists and communicators. So, starting out, covering climate is hard, as the science itself really involves many sciences in the same bucket. So to prove climate change is really a thing, and that it's happening right here, right now, we need geological sciences, atmospheric sciences, ecology, biological sciences, chemistry, physics. And there's the medical side of the problem as well when we talk about human and animal health, not to mention the social, economic, political, philosophical implications of climate change. So it's easy as a journalist to get lost among those many tracks because they're often intertwined. So environmental coverage leans a lot on science, and scientific coverage helps us understand environmental processes. And there's a lot of politics and economy in between. So as climate science evolved, so did climate coverage. In the past few years, climate change has been much more in the media worldwide, and especially after the terrible toll that the pandemic had on us all over the world. Now, all eyes are on climate change. Climate scientists say that it's the greatest issue of our generation, and we all must deal with it. And this decade is the defining decade for us to make or break the future and the future of our sons and future generations. So one interesting aspect about how, here it is. So an interesting aspect about how climate change coverage has evolved, in my point of view at least, has to do with the more extreme events taking place in the global north. So now we just have an example in the US. Those of you who are in the East Coast of the US, you're seeing stacks of smoke coming from fires in Canada, and we have seen floods, ravaging Germany a few years ago, droughts in locations of Europe and in the United States, fires that have eaten wildlife in Australia and California. We have seen the strength of hurricanes like Ian, Ida, Harvey, Katrina many years ago. And now we all wonder what climate change has to do with these events and whether a changing climate has made them stronger and more frequent. So many of them are, many aren't. And here we have the importance of attribution science to help us tell one thing from another. But really, if just countries in Africa, so now being very sincere, if just countries in Africa and Southeast Asia or Latin America were suffering with extreme events, we probably wouldn't have nearly as much coverage as we do have now. So climate change has imposed itself as a subject we cannot avoid talking about, but especially, because now the global north is feeling it too. And the thing is that with these extreme events, a lot of disinformation came along, an avalanche of disinformation and misinformation, because climate science, like I said, is really hard. So dealing with misinformation and disinformation imposes a huge challenge for us as journalists. First of them is to devise the difference between both concepts and understand what is the ecosystem of information disorder. So Claire Wardle, the one that you see in the picture here, she's the founder of First Draft News, one of the most important fact-checking agencies in the United States. It has now closed, but they have a very, very good conceptual scheme to explain what is what. So as Claire Wardle shows us, we have disinformation, misinformation, and malinformation, and they are different things. So they all encompass this information disorder context that I want to point out to you. So we have a difference between them. Misinformation is an incorrect information that doesn't necessarily intend to cause harm. It can be a parody that someone took as true news, a wrong photo caption, or a misplaced headline that can lead to a false connection, for example. And then we have, on the other side, malinformation, which is information with clear content to harm, but it's not necessarily incorrect, or it's not necessarily a lie. So it can be, for example, the exposition of intimate photos, leaking of personal documents and emails, the sharing of sensitive and private information about a person who's the target of this harm, nude photos that are exposed. It's not disinformation, it's not wrong information necessarily, but it has clear content to harm. So it's malinformation. Now, disinformation is the junction of both. It's false content fabricated with the intent to harm. So here's where we can fit fabricated content, which is 100% false with clear intent to harm. We have manipulated content in which you can have some genuine content, but it's tweaked to deceive. So this is disinformation. And then we have some other kinds of dis and misinformation, and these seven types of disinformation, I knew this. They are in between these categories that I've just mentioned. So, like I said, you can have a satire or a parody, and the person who's sharing doesn't know that it's a satire and takes it for real information. And we can have like imposter content, and we have many more here, and we have many more types of manipulated content. So, like Claire Waddle says, disinformation is intentionally false and designed to cause harm. It's motivated by three factors: to make money, to have political influence, either foreign or domestic, or to cause trouble for the sake of it. So when this information is shared, it turns into misinformation, because it's like a triangle, that we have. At the very top, you have this fabrication of disinformation, this false content with intent to harm, and it's very well organized, very well financed. And then from the top of the pyramid, it starts trickling down to the base of the pyramid, where your mother, your father, my uncle, my aunts, they are. And when they share this, the disinformation at the top becomes misinformation. And they are sharing this disinformation thinking that they are helping, but actually they're not, and they don't know about it. So as journalists, we have to deal with this ecosystem and be aware that disinformation is an orchestrated and very well-financed movement. And the people who do this, they know their trade. They're very good at it. And once I heard a Brazilian scientist say that disinformation is produced and distributed at the wholesale scale, but misinformation, but it's actually tackled at the retail level. So it's impossible for us as journalists to face the problem alone. There must be regulation so that the platforms take responsibility and act to curb the spread of disinformation and hate speech. And here we have techniques of science denial. At some point I did annotate here. I'm sorry about this yellow line on the slide. I didn't see that, but I must have done it while trying to, change the slides. But anyways, an extra art for our slides here. So in trying to tackle with this, we as journalists have to know about the techniques that are most used to disengage and to disinform. So in the climate change world, we have all kinds of mis and disinformation going on, like from outright denial of the human impact on climate systems to the doom discourses that say that, oh yes, climate change is happening, but there's nothing we can do about it, or we are going to hurt the economy if we do anything about it. So you see both ends of these discourses. They are very harmful, and people profit from, spreading those types of ideas. And historically, the oil sector has had a lot of power in spreading these kinds of arguments, and they have profited a lot in sowing disinformation and seeding doubt, mostly because when we as journalists try to give the other side on climate change, we are actually disinforming. And the oil sector have been for a long time a master in demanding that journalists give the other side, because just sowing doubt for them is enough. You don't need to deny the whole science. You just put a sip of doubt in there, and it's enough to confuse the whole conversation. So here's an interesting system that helps us navigate through some of the most used disinformation techniques, the FLIC framework that John Cook of the University of Queensland has perfected. So you have fake experts, like when you have a nuclear physicist talking about climate change, for example. You have logical fallacies, like, you know, this type of argument that says that climate has varied in the past, so it must be varying naturally now. We have impossible expectations, like politicians saying that we cannot act before being 100% sure, and we know that's not how science works. We have cherry picking, when people just look at the theory that proves their point, and we have conspiracy theories that we all know, you know, that we have all seen very much about. You know, the UN in the climate gate trying to make the new world order with environmentalists, you know, this kind of thing. So we have these techniques, and I really recommend you all to have a look at John Cook's framework. I'll leave a resource sheet with Gorel later for you to have a look. And well, this imposes a lot of challenges for us as journalists, because we have to juggle the hard scientific facts and get them right, be aware of mis and disinformation to engage the public in the conversation in the middle of it all. But the good news is that reliable scientific facts are easily available. Scientists are more and more willing to collaborate and talk to journalists, and we are getting some seasoned, we are getting seasoned in dealing with climate mis and disinformation in journalism. So everyone is already being affected by climate change one way or another. So it's, it makes it easier in, to a certain level to bring it home and make sense of climate change to, everyday people. Now, how can we as journalists engage the public with climate change? So here, I have some numbers to show you that people in general are not very engaged with climate change news. According to the 2022 digital news report of the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism at the University of Oxford, this is the scenario that we have. So this is the level of engagement that we have of people with climate change across the world. So you see, at most you have like 52%, like in Chile, for example, 52% in the Philippines, 53% of engagement in Greece and Portugal. And then you have like, around the 40-something%, 30% in the United States. So you see that generally, people are not very much engaged with climate change. The highest degrees are in Greece and Portugal. Yes, you see there in the middle of here, in the middle of the graph. So, and they're followed by the Philippines and Chile with 52% of engagement. The United States is very low. And Norway and Hong Kong, we also have like 33% of engagement with climate change. So why does that happen? According to the report, these differences in interest happen mainly because of political polarization of climate change. So if we look at the proportional gap between left and right, you're going to see that the most polarized countries are where, unsurprisingly, we have the least engagement with climate change news. So you see, in Greece, for example, which you have the highest level of interest, polarization is the lowest. So you see the difference between polarization between like Portugal and Greece, for example, and the US. So the higher the polarization, the lowest the interest for climate change news. So, you know, another important issue, according to this Reuters report, is how much climate change people experience in their daily lives. So, for example, Greece, Portugal, and Chile, they have seen terrible wildfires and droughts increasing in length and frequency, and other places in the global north are starting to experience that right now. And we have seen that in the global south for a while. So, you know, that also gets into the sum of how much people are willing to engage with climate change. Now, how to engage people with climate change? I really recommend everyone to take a look at the report for a more detailed view of the scenario. And you see that sources of information about climate change vary a lot. And I'm just going to finish. So we as journalists, we are losing interest for documentaries because they are very well crafted, very well narrated, very beautiful. So maybe we can try to do that in journalism as well to get people involved, or in other types of communications. So some tips that I have, having a look at this report and, you know, from my own experience are, one, we can try to be more like documentaries, because documentaries really get the attention of people when we talk about climate change. We can discuss ways to depolarize the issue with our editors and colleagues. So it's a hard question, but we must think about it, you know, how to depolarize climate change. Third place, closeness. So if people who experience climate change in their everyday lives are more interested in the issue, how can we bring climate change home and closer to people for them to feel it as, you know, something that's happening locally? How can we improve local reporting in the issue so that we can show that it matters for everyday people? And fourth, besides, you know, local reporting, we can also invest in solutions reporting. Climate change is mostly about gloom and doom, and this is highly disengaging. People feel disempowered and overwhelmed. And, you know, if we have solutions reporting, maybe we can change that. Now, just another interesting view for you, and this is in the resource sheet also. Here we have 5 concerns about misrepresentation and underrepresentation of people in the news. And, you know, just to mention one aspect of why people feel disengaged with the news is that, you know, if they are a marginalized community, they feel they are represented in a biased way, in an unbalanced way, you know, they are represented in stereotypes. So when we're talking about disadvantaged communities, and we can bring some tips also from that research that the Reuters Institute did to try to engage people with the news in general, and that can help with climate change news as well. So when we communicate or report, we can try to reduce bias, you know, of the communities that we are talking about, be more accurate. We can tell more complete stories. So that thing about in-depth reporting, just like documentaries do, we can try to do that in our everyday communication and journalism as well. We can try to diversify the newsrooms and improve training. This is something more, you know, how can I say, structural to the news and to communications, but it's extremely important because more diverse news, you know, when you have more diverse journalists or communicators, they're going to have different points of view that can connect with the people who are reading us. So this is really, really helpful. And we can think about the distinct needs of different audiences. So look at the people we are talking to and try to identify what they need. So this report from the Reuters Institute is great. I'm going to leave the link for you later, and it can surely help us with improving climate change coverage. Now, just to finish, I also want to talk about bringing, looking for help, seeking for help. So this is where the Journalism and Communicators Network come in. So the first place I would start looking for help is the World Federation of Science Journalists. They have lots of member associations and networks. You can also look for the Solutions Journalism Network for help, environmental journalists networks, because they are all looking at these topics as well. And we can improve our communication and reporting when we talk to colleagues. We are not alone, and we can do a better job if we get together and collaborate instead of compete. So thank you very, very much. Muito obrigada. And here we go.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Meghie. Thanks a lot for that presentation. We have had some questions coming in the chat. And Nancy says, for those that aren't journalists, what is the best way we can ensure we practice critical thought processes when it comes to articles, news stories, social media posts, etc., rather than just mindlessly consuming information?
That's a very good question. We can check, and see if it's news that we can use, because there is this concept of news you can use, and they are really, what's the impact of that in your everyday life? So, when we are consuming information, we can first try to assess if it's useful for our everyday lives and how it makes us feel. Normally a good piece of news is going to make you feel like more empowered than disempowered, more engaged than disengaged, and try to look for those sources and share them with friends. Whenever you have a good news of, a good piece of news of climate change, something that makes you think, something that makes you engaged, we can also use social media and share that with people, because sometimes people are not engaged with the theme because they first don't know where to look for good climate change information, or they're feeling very disempowered and disengaged. So if you are interested in that and you're looking for specific news sources, independent grassroots climate change journalism, you can share that with your friends, to see if that helps them think differently about the subject as well.
I also think I would like to follow up on that answer a bit. If we're going to, how do we critically look at the information? I mean, we're overwhelmed with information. There's a constant flow of information. And how do we critically sift through all the information and make sure that we don't ourselves get misled?
Yeah, that's a very hard question,
If you have any tricks or tips?
Yes. Yes. So, try to research a little bit about what the science actually says, So there are lots of interesting videos of the IPCC on YouTube or NASA, try to look for reputable sources that are talking about climate change to understand a little bit what is the consensus around climate change, why human activities have actually impact over the climate change that we are seeing. So you can try to walk the extra mile and, try to understand the scientific conversation around climate change. Of course, you're not going to be a climate scientist, but if you are really interested in the subject, there's much, there are lots of very reputable and good resources, scientists really, that talk about the subject. And then when you see a piece of news for example, that goes against what you have just read in NASA, about the subject, then you will know that it's not exactly correct, So go to the scientific sources and then create your own antenna, for disinformation, for what falls off the
yes, great,
rail.
great. Yes, thank you. Annunciata comments here. Sometimes communicators can't provide us with the true information because they don't have access, or they're not allowed to communicate those information, and this is a main challenge. Is that something that you've come across as well?
I think more and more editors in newsrooms, they are aware of the problem, right? So unless you're in a very polarized newsroom, I guess this is not exactly the type of problem that journalists have to face anymore, because it's widespread. It's a problem everybody knows about mostly.
Right. Would you, because several participants, including myself, would like, if you write that link down for the Reuters report that you were talking about, you'll share it in the chat after the session?
Yes. I can actually share a resource sheet with you, Gabriel, if you like, with many of the links that I shared. Would that be better, or do you prefer the link right here?
You can actually do like that, share it with me, and I will make sure you can email it to me, and I will make sure that I email it to everyone, also because those who are not participating in the live session, they can also have that then. So be patient, everyone listening in today. The link will come in an email from me.
There are lots of links there, by the way. So I put
right.
them all.
So many links and useful.
There's everything there.
Yeah. Right. I think we just answered, as a journalist, how can we identify fake experts, considering that some academics have contrary views regarding climate change? Interesting. Yes. That's our last question of the day.
Yes. Try to look for the funding. Try to. If you're like sort of, have a little doubt about this or that researcher, dig a little into his life or her life, see who in the Congress he's talking to, see what groups of interest. I mean, does he work for the big oil? Has he ever been paid, by big agribusiness? So who funds his or her research? So just looking at some of the past life of the person, you're going to see if that person is a fake expert or not. Because even being a climatologist, depending on the source of funding for the research that he or she has, you can be like suspicious,
Very good. Thank you. Thank you very much, Meghie, for joining us here on Watering Communications. Much appreciated indeed. It's now time to introduce our next speaker, and that's our final speaker of the day. I think that we have Charles Shachinda with us. Charles, are you there somewhere?
Yes, that's right.
Yes.
Right.
Hello, Charles. How are you?
Great, thank you, Jarell. It's a pleasure to be part of the workshop. And,
thank you very much for joining us. Where are you tuning in from?
I'm tuning in from Leeds, North England.
Good. And just as a short introduction, you're a technical officer, International British Water, and also an AWA, International Water Association, and Grundfos Youth Action for SD6 Fellow.
That's
correct.
Right.
Yes.
Correct.
And you and I are going to have a little Q&A, and then we'll talk about, we'll start with the UN conference, should we? Because you were there at the UN conference. You were one of 14 international young water professionals selected by IWA and Grundfos to be part of a youth delegation. What was your role during the conference?
Thank you for that question, Jarell. I was just going to mention to kick off that it's been great listening to the previous speakers, and hopefully I can also add probably sow good seeds of innovation for a water-wise future. As you mentioned really well, I am part of the 14 young water professionals that were chosen by the International Water Association, Grundfos, as part of a fellowship. And the role of the youth delegates at the United Water Conference was twofold, essentially twofold. So the first part involved actively taking an active participation in a wide range of events, whether it was plenary meetings, dialogues, or spatial side events, as an opportunity to be able to share their ideas and solutions as they envision or see them, and as well as to make their voices heard, and equally to advocate for a water-wise future to which young people are actively and unequivocally a part of as water future leaders across all the different kinds of thematic areas. A second key role that young people played was rapporteuring, which essentially involved capturing and as well as documenting the key discussions and calls to actions, as well as commitments that were being made by various organizations across the different kinds of sections that we were part of, which then resulted into the Water Action Agenda as a mandated outcome of the conference. So those were two major roles. But besides that, I did also see young people signing memorandums and understandings, as well as agreements, partnering different kinds of projects. So essentially, that was the role of young people at the conference.
Right. So the youth presence was quite big.
It was actually. It was. Yeah.
Great. And now afterwards, I mean, do you think that what is the role that the youth can play to follow up on promises in New York? Are you the ones that are now going to hold all the other people accountable?
Absolutely, 100%. I think there is an even great opportunity for young people to play a pivotal role post the conference by following through on the key commitments in the Water Action Agenda as pretty much a way to offer checks and balances. But I think even more pragmatically would be for young people to proactively engage with those different kinds of organizations, whether in the private or public sector, in the specific countries or regions, to be able to find means and ways to partner either on their ongoing projects or those that are planned in the future. And I think that really helps to be able to create that linkage and be able to accelerate progress towards achieving SDG 6. And I'll give you a bit of an example there. So the Water Action Agenda is very open access. You can get onto them. It's easy to navigate. You can see which organization is doing what, or probably has committed to do something. Part of the session I was part of was around, one of them was around pollution, water quality, and climate resilience, and how that connects to sanitation. So one of the big organizations we had was the Asia Development Bank, and as well as the African Development Bank. So the African Development Bank made a commitment to promote smart technologies around sanitation, and as well as to promote local players. And as part of that, what they're trying to do is they've initiated a program called Urban Sanitation Inclusive Initiative, which mainly is aimed at promoting diagnostics and as well as helping to build the capacity of local players like fecal sludge emptiers, and as well as those that manage decentralized sanitation systems. So there is an opportunity there for the youth to be able to, get out information and be able to mobilize the right kind of people to be able to, leverage on those opportunities and make a difference. And as a result of that, I think that really helps to accelerate progress towards achieving SDG 6.
Right, thank you. I hope you do follow up on all of that. That's important. Let's leave the water conference, and I just want to know, because I think it's interesting and a little bit curious about, how did you get into water? Why are you involved in water?
That's a really good question. I think from the outset, it would be about right to say that water has had a hold of me since my childhood. Whether I look at it from the more extensive travels that my family and I often took to either see a waterfall, a lake, or a river, and just all the beautiful biodiversity that water supports. But I think a more tangible career transformation and indoctrination in the water sector, if you like, began when I worked for the Zambian local government a couple of years back as Assistant Director of Engineering. So I then, coming from a more very typical civil structural engineering background, when I worked in a couple of water and sanitation projects, I was constantly stunned by just how water and sanitation was inextricably linked to human health and development. And having had extensive travel, especially in the rural and urban areas, I could hardly see how, especially those that live in rural areas and on the peripheries of major cities, what is often referred to as slums, and just how they desperately just needed water, clean water and improved sanitation for them to get by. They didn't really need much. And also going on, I think what is even more heart-wrenching is just understanding how the mortality rate is, tied into inadequate and unimproved water and sanitation services. So it really emanates from coupled with the more, other more exciting water endeavors. And I felt the need to be able to make a contribution in the water sector. So then that prompted me to pursue a master's in water sanitation health engineering at the University of Leeds. And I've been with British Water ever since. So yeah, that's where it all started from. That's where the inspiration comes from.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing your water journey with us. Youth participation in water sector, we often talk about it. We need the young people to be engaged, participate. We need to listen to their voices. What would you say are the biggest challenges or biggest obstacles for youth participation in the water sector?
I think the challenges are multidimensional, but it nonetheless helps to better understand them by pretty much looking at them either from a social, economic, or cultural and political manifestation, and just how they come about. So I would say from a social perspective, I would pick limited networking and mentorship opportunities for young people. So you got a really good number of really young people, looking for role models and mentors in the water sector. And if that is in short supply, then it means there can be very diminished interest from young people to be able to pursue careers in the water sector as a result of it. From an economic perspective, I would say limited job opportunities and low wages. So if you have a situation where, especially in countries where either the country itself or the water sector is facing a lot of economic issues, then obviously there will be, there won't be enough job opportunities for young people in that sector, specifically the water sector in this case. And as well as for entry-level jobs that can be very low paying, and that wouldn't be attractive for young people to, get into that industry. They'd rather go to oil and gas or pretty much other industries that are more lucrative and pay them well. So that is a bigger challenge on an economic perspective. When we go on to like a cultural aspect, I would pick more, say, traditional occupations and values, and I'll explain that. You have certain societies where certain occupations are more preferred than others. So when you look at the water sector, for instance, there's quite a lot of pushback. Most families would want the kids to either do medicine or law or different kinds of engineering. So that can cause a barrier as well for young people to be able to pursue careers in the water sector. More often than not, for instance, fecal/emptiers will suffer a lot of negative, stigma because of the kind of job they do in the sanitation sector. So that can cause a really big barrier as well. And last but not the least is from a political perspective. I think lack of youth representation can be a really big issue because if you have a situation where young people are not part of decision-making, discussions, or are not well represented across, the water sector itself, it results in a case where there will be even the programs that are implemented or probably initiatives that are put together, there will be less interest for young people to be part of it because they are not included in the decision-making. So those would be the major challenges I would pick at the minute.
Yes, There's quite a lot, but what we need then is we need better or more role models and more mentors, but we also need maybe more funding for youth and young people to actually do training and to educate in the sector. And we need more representatives like yourself. In your work with British Water, I mean, do you feel that you contribute with the youth voice, or do people see as, oh, we have our young representative, what does he think? Or how do you see your role in British Water?
That's a really good question. How I see my role really is, I think we talk about inclusion more often than not, and I think in my role so far it's been quite very exciting from the word go. I think I do contribute as a water professional. I feel many of the discussions are part of more often than not the young person in the room, and one of my favorite people in the water sector, Professor Barbara Evans, said something very interesting when I was doing my master's. She said, if there are people that you are highly likely to be in touch with for the rest of your life, it's water people. And when I got into the water sector, I think that became very evident because of a reason. I think when an industry is purpose driven, people are very more accommodating as well. So it's been really good, and that's why I think we need to be able to continue having those discussions. And in my role within British Water has been very exciting, working with different kinds of water industries and markets. Probably there could be undertones because I work with different kinds of water markets across the globe. But so far so good. It's been exciting as a young person, being able to make contributions in the best way I can.
And thank you for that. And we often also speak about the importance about intergenerational dialogue, and to have a meaningful intergenerational dialogue. How do we create that, do you think?
Yeah, that's a really good question as well. I think an intergenerational conversation is very important because as a sector, we are grappling with a really huge challenge, which is skills shortage gap that we have to contend with, and really kind of bridge that gap between the next generation and the water leaders at the minute. So that's why we need that kind of conversation because it really helps us to be able to not get to a situation where there's a tragedy of commons per se, where we have a really huge gap. So at the minute, statistics say that the water sector, for instance, only employs about 80 million people. That only represents 1% across all sectors. So that shows you the kind of challenge that we're facing at the minute. In the United States only, about 20 to 30% of the workforce in utility water sector related space, they will be reaching their retirement age. Statistics say, according to the International Labour Organizations, by 2020. So that's already happened, if not happening already. And for the global water sector by 2030. So then we don't have a situation where there's that knowledge gap. So we want to start now where we have that intergenerational conversation so that we pass on, the knowledge and as well as, pretty much young people understanding what the bigger challenge really is and knowing what kind of future is being left to them. So that's why it's very key to have that kind of conversation. You would also look at it from how a family business is run. So you have a father and a mom who probably create a business, and at the course of time they have kids, and then they realize that towards the end of their lifespan, and then they want to pass it on to the next generation, which are the kids. So they train them on how the business should work and what they should look out for and how they can grow it. And then that keeps on going from generation to generation. So it works the same way.
That's a very good example. I want to touch on a different subject. You and I spoke a little bit earlier, and you wanted to raise also the social cultural aspect of water and why it's so important that we take that into respect and respect the social cultural aspects of water if we are to achieve the SDG 6. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So the social cultural aspect of water is important because water means different things to different people. So because you have that, you got social cultural norms and traditions that come into play, and then that influences how people use and manage water resources. So I think it would be very inconsiderate for any program, initiative, or professional that would want to resolve a wash issue in a specific setting, and especially in settings where you have more very traditional ethnic groupings, to overlook that aspect, because it's very important to be able to accelerate progress towards achieving SDG 6. But of course, there are social cultural norms that outrightly create a barrier to accelerating progress. But there are, however, social cultural norms that we can leverage to be able to bolster efforts towards achieving SDG 6. To put that into context a little bit, we all know that, for instance, the river Ganges is a very sacred river for the vast majority of the Indian population, and as well as the peoples of Bangladesh that live along the river, and it's supporting in agriculture and fisheries and other things, really good for their livelihood. But because they have that spiritual connection with the river, you can leverage on that to be able to, help them manage the water really well. The big challenge right now in the river Ganges is really high pollution. And in about 2015, for instance, the Indian government put up a program they called Clean Up the Ganges River. And so, understanding that kind of thing, if you want to put up a program, you really have to respect the social cultural aspect of things, and understanding that spiritual connection that people have with water. You can then leverage on that to be able to help them understand that, it's just their livelihood, and you need to incorporate that to be able to reduce pollution in the river. And you can type that the theories of change, for instance, theories of change that have been used to change behavior. So that's why we need to respect the social cultural norm.
Right. And I also know time is running, I see. But one more thing that is close to your heart is affordability. And you've been working on that issue. And the affordability of water, I think you said, is the biggest challenge if we are to reach SDG 6.
Yes, absolutely, 100%. So part of the research that my colleagues and I were doing that looked into what the water sector would look like after 2030 and after 2050, affordability came up as a really, really critical issue that most people are facing. There are different kinds of schools of thought around affordability and how to go around it. But more specifically in developing countries where people live below the poverty line, and do not earn as good money. So the comparison there, for instance, I in the UK here, at my own convenience, I receive tap water and probably costs me around £1.9 or about £2 max for a cubic meter of water. But in those settings, for instance, not only do people have to pay for water, but they have to walk really long distances. So there's also that added challenge that comes with them trying to access water, and also quality is everything. They might be able to access that water, but is it of good quality as well? So affordability, in a sense, I think is a really big issue that we need to address if we are to make any tangible progress as well. So we need to look at local solutions, for instance, that will be able to help those people, because obviously in a rural setting, you're not looking at a really big water treatment plant, and who's going to pay for it? So we're looking at more sustainable solutions that would help people to be able to manage their own water resources, but also not compromising on quality, and making sure that really helps to be able to better their livelihoods. Right,
thank you. We have some comments here from the chat. Sabina says, also interestingly, even in Nepal, Ganges is a holy river. That's more of a comment. And Meghna says that all major rivers are holy in India as per Hinduism. A comment there. Bulawaita Wachio also has a comment when we spoke about earlier. The gap is already huge between current water leaders and decision makers and the new professionals coming on board. How do we close this gap? Is it only better pay or more mentors, or is it?
That's a really good question, honestly. And I think why it's often very hard to answer that question is because when Freitas young people say, well, we need a seat at the table, we have a discussion, people cannot really pinpoint what the challenges are. And part of what I'm trying to do at the minute is kind of really streamline what the challenges really are, sort of like on a social, cultural, economic, and political level, to really help try and see how we can build skills development, especially on young people, or probably, different kinds of professionals across different kinds of sectors. So I think the best way to bridge that gap, especially towards achieving SDG 6, we need a lot of capacity building. It really ties into the United Nations Global Accelerator Framework, for instance. One of the pillars, the key pillars or principles, is capacity building. So if we can be able to do that, I think it really helps us to have that conversation, and as well as be able to get more people attracted to the water sector and really attract them and keep them there and harness those skills, so that we can then close that gap. It's a bit dynamic, but I think, in my view, water skills development is at the center of it all to be able to close that gap.
Yeah, and will Tita also comment here also about training skills. Professional training in the water sector is expensive, and a lot of young people from the global south cannot afford it, and that's a huge limiting factor. And that's where we
absolutely
brought up the funding bit, that we probably need maybe more fellowships, more fundings, more trainings for people, especially in the global south. Marissa has also a comment here, which ties in with Meghie's talk before. This example of youth participation, together with what Meghie said, is a way of making central groups, youth, women, indigenous people, visible, and providing data, considering the particularities by country and even localities. I mean, showing diversity is an important angle in what we do. Totally agree on that. We need to show more and different faces in our discussions. We need to bring in more voices.
Absolutely, yeah.
We do have time for one more last question here from Fernanda. What is the best way to motivate young people to act on the water sector, and what are the main tips that you will suggest?
Yep, so that's a really good question. I think in my answer, I've then tied it into talking about inclusion as well. So for young people, I think the best way to motivate them is to just ensure they're part of the conversation. And that's how we have that intergenerational conversation to start with. A good example is this very workshop. And I was very pleased to read about the gold standard, for instance, for World Water Week, where the gold standard is to have a young person there, is to have different kinds of people across different kinds of social stratum. And I think that's where it all starts from, because I often say, when we talk about inclusion, for instance, we cannot talk about inclusion while it's leaving out the very people we're trying to include. Then at the end of the day, we're just simply talking and listening to ourselves. So it's very important to bring our voices on board, and especially for young people, that's the best way to motivate them. So give them the opportunity to be part of the conversation, because then they know that they are literally, taking the future that's been left to them in their own hands. That really helps. So if I'm left on the sidelines every now and then pretty much I'm not very interested in what's going on. So I cannot be able to make a contribution. But there is just, young people are very dynamic, as much as the water sector is very dynamic as well. So that's the best way. I think that's the best tip. And then drilling it down to communicators as well. I think the onus is pretty much on you as well to engage young people, to hear the thoughts and what they're thinking about their future with regards to climate change and what's happening and how they intend to resolve those problems.
Thank you. Very good answer. Very good last question. Tito, are you all right to write in the chat? Did you want to say something?
Okay, yes, I just want to say briefly, one question or one thought I would like to leave with everyone is, how do we move youth inclusion from just ticking check boxes? Because to me, for the UN Water Conference, for instance, and Seaweed World Water Week, we have these standards, and everyone as an afterthought then thinks about young people to bring them on board. I was in several sessions at the UN Water Conference, and I was the youngest person in the room in all of these sessions, including the interactive dialogue on health. And it makes me wonder, and they put it in terms like, for instance, getting a youth perspective on this issue. But then it's just that they are not bringing these people on board as water experts to make meaningful contributions and allow these engagements to be long-term. It's just like, okay, let's tick this box, we've done this thing. So how do we move conversations and youth engagements from just ticking boxes to actually being part of the solutions? Because all of these people who come to these conferences, they're going to be long gone they're going to be gone in a few years. And young people are the ones that would bear the brunt of their actions now or their inactions. So we need to start thinking that these young people are the ones who will take these processes forward. We're the ones who will do these things beyond 2030. So how do we make sure that young people become the water leaders that will be able to, sustain the actions that are being taken now moving forward? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very well. Thank you very much, Bulwechito. I think it's important we don't tick boxes. I think all of us know that that's crucial to actually listen and to take action on the youth agenda. And we should bear those words with us as well.